The wounded terrorist then opened the leather wallet he had taken out earlier and placed it open by his head. He brushed a little snow on it to make it look as if it had fallen from his pocket. A silver shield in the wallet caught the brilliant morning light. There were 6 words embossed around the edge of the shield. They read, Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. 5 minutes later, the rotor blades of 2 helicopters could be heard cutting their way through the frozen air that had all but frozen the wounded man. Squinting through one open eye, the other having been frozen shut, he saw the 2 jet-black war machines burst into view, each bristling with enough weaponry to obliterate a small army. One of the craft landed immediately amongst clouds of shimmering ice crystals that blew up from the helicopter's downwash. The other fighting machine continued to circle until 17 fighting men had rushed out of the first. Then, trading tasks, the other craft landed and offloaded its human cargo. Minutes seemed to pass like hours as the wounded man lay there waiting to be discovered. It was, in fact, 15 minutes before he felt the muzzle of an AK-47 assault rifle prodding him in the side. The half-frozen man opened one eye and looked upon a young soldier's face. The field uniform and weapon told him this was a Russian black beret. Keeping his rifle pointed squarely at the prone man's chest, the young Russian bent over and scooped up the leather wallet by the terrorist's head. The soldier examined it closely and then spoke quickly into a 2-way radio attached to his coat. This communication brought 4 men running to see the man the young Russian had found. One of the newcomers was a Russian medic, who immediately began to tend to the man's wounds. The others were American Navy SEALs, 2 enlisted men and 1 officer. It was the officer who took the wounded man's credentials from the young Russian soldier. He radioed Central Command to get confirmation of the wounded man's documents. A 3rd helicopter landed moments later, and the wounded man was carried inside. This craft was basically a mobile hospital and was outfitted with the most modern life-saving equipment available. 2 doctors labored to stabilize the man's condition. Intravenous lines were started and drugs administered to relieve pain and induce unconsciousness so that they could perform preliminary surgery on his left ear. However, just before he drifted off to sleep, he heard an American officer say to a subordinate,
Yeah, that's right. He's FBI, all right. He was on some kind of personnel inspection. Damn fool got himself caught up in a miniature war. Make sure you round up everyone who was in on this. Washington's already heard about it, and they're hopping mad. They want everything hushed up.
The traitorous FBI agent's lips curled into a fiendish smile as consciousness slipped away. 20 years later. The image of a yacht resting quietly on the Caribbean would normally bring forth thoughts of relaxation and pleasure. However, what was going on in the yacht's main cabin was far from that. A man and a woman, both in their late 30s, sat in chairs facing each other. Their arms and legs were handcuffed and their bodies tied firmly to the chairs with heavy rope. It was evident they both had received brutal beatings. In the room with them was a collection of human filth, 13 of the most worthless human scum to ever disgrace the face of planet Earth. One of them was seated on a soft, overstuffed armchair and dressed in a fashionable 3-piece suit. He looked at the man tied to the chair.
Now, Detective Jensen. Look at what you made me do to your wife. A black eye looks very unbecoming on a woman. If you would just tell me what the Key West police and the FBI know about my operation tomorrow night, and we could all be friends.
Detective Jensen looked frostily at the nemesis.
Eat shit and die, Gomez.
No, is that any way to talk to someone who just wants to make your life easier? And by the way, he's Major Gomez.
Why don't you take the 2 tons of cocaine you got on this tub and blow it up your ass?
With that, a signal from Major Gomez brought a young black man forward with a sawed-off pump-action shotgun. He held it less than an inch from the detective's wife's head. The black man gripped the weapon tightly with sweat-covered hands, although the cabin was pleasantly cool. There was also a noticeable shake throughout his whole body as well. Seeing this, Detective Jensen instantly surmised he was suffering from cocaine withdrawals, and in that condition he could easily pull the trigger inadvertently. The detective strained at his bond in vain. Hate filled his mind, not because he was going to die, that was not important. It was his wife. She was the only woman in the world who understood what drove him to be a cop and loved him for it. He looked over at her with one eye open, the other having been closed from repeated beating. She sat silent, resolutely and determined not to break down, which would put pressure on her husband to tell the drug dealer what they wanted to know. 2 decks above on the bridge sat an overweight Hispanic man who was just as vile as the drug dealers below. He was stretched out on a green, high-backed vinyl chair with his feet propped up on the yacht's command console. A nearly empty pitcher of margaritas was in one hand and a Playboy magazine was in the other. Taking a slurp from the pitcher, some of the half-frozen mix dribbled down the side of his face and dropped onto a pair of binoculars that hung around his neck. It was evident that this disgusting man was the lookout. Built into the console by his feet was a radar screen. On it swept a brilliant amber line that ran around the screen like a second hand on an analog watch. For hours, the brilliant line had not swept by any other object within its 6-mile range. Consequently, the lookout had lost interest in that aspect of his duties. However, on the next sweep, the radar screen displayed a small dot. After each consecutive sweep, the dot moved closer to the center of the screen where the yacht rested. It was not until the lookout was trying to open the centerfold of the magazine that his eyes caught the small dot on the screen. The Hispanic quickly kicked his feet off the console and put down the magazine and the pitcher of margaritas. He had to catch himself as he stood up from the grip the alcohol had on his almost useless brain. Squinting at the radar screen, he determined in which direction the other craft was coming. Getting his bearings, which was not easy, he brought the binoculars to his eyes. He cursed loudly to himself, for some of the margarita mix had dropped into one of the eyepieces and obscured the view through that lens. But even so, he quickly located a blue and red speedboat that was the object the radar had picked up. He watched as the sleek craft came to a stop in the distance. There seemed to be only one occupant, a ravishing young woman. She was tall and had very long strawberry blonde hair that reached past her waist. Her breasts were like ripe grapefruits that rested on a world-class athlete's body. She was clad in a red, skin-tight 2-piece swimsuit, and she looked to be in her early 20s. The man licked his lips as he brought his binoculars down and tried to clean the spilled margarita mix off the lens so he'd get a better look. When he looked through the binoculars again, he saw only the speedboat. The woman was gone. He searched the water around the sleek craft for several minutes, but there was no sign of her. Being told to report anything out of the ordinary, he put down his binoculars and picked up the intercom to call down to his boss in the main cabin. At that moment, he heard a shotgun blast and men yelling from below. Thinking this would not be a good time to bother his boss about a speedboat and a beautiful girl 2 miles away, he returned to his chair. Reaching for his magazine, he opened it back to the centerfold. One of the fastest creatures in the Caribbean is the bottlenose dolphin. These mammals can propel their light gray bodies at speeds in excess of 35 miles per hour. At this particular moment, a school of bottlenose dolphins were swimming in the general direction of a large white yacht that sat quietly on the smooth Caribbean. At first glance, there was nothing out of the ordinary about this school of dolphins, but with closer scrutiny, it seemed there was a red dolphin swimming with the rest. Yet, if this was a dolphin, it would have been the first to have arms and legs and long blonde hair. More likely, this red object was a woman like no one had ever seen before, for this human was easily keeping up with the bottlenose dolphins, which was fully 10 times faster than the fastest Olympic swimmer. At 50 yards from the yacht, the school of dolphins veered away, but the unusual swimmer kept her course. A minute later, she was pulling herself aboard the yacht. If the fact that this woman was able to keep up with dolphins was not incredible enough, she had done so while swimming underwater and had never once surfaced to take a breath of air. And now that she was aboard the yacht, she seemed to be in no hurry to fill her lungs. A single breath was all she took. Anyone who might have seen her standing on the yacht's deck would have described her as an incredibly beautiful young woman. She had legs that were unnaturally long and seemed to give her the better part of her 5'9" height. Her narrow hips and waist were a contrast to her shoulders that were a bit wider than a woman of her height might have, but more than ample breasts diminished that fact. Her body was lean and athletic, with a face so perfect it looked as if it had been chiseled from marble. Another strange quality about her was her hair. It was waist-length and strawberry blonde, but it seemed to sparkle as if there were tiny diamonds in it. Even now, soaked with water, it still exhibited this same strange quality. With all these extraordinary features, there was still something else, and that something else could not be pointed out or described. It was a feeling that this gorgeous woman had not come to be by the random mingling of human egg and sperm, but was something much, much more. This exceptional woman turned her attention to the bridge one deck above her. As she moved toward an access ladder, a small black device could be seen strapped to her waist. It was about the size of a hand calculator. Coming to the polished aluminum access ladder, she ascended to the bridge, where she saw a Hispanic man sitting on a high back chair. She noted that the man was consumed with what he held in his hands, a magazine, a Playboy magazine. She made her way to him with no more noise than a shadow. The magazine was open to the centerfold, where an attractive young woman lay sprawled out on a fluffy white comforter. Standing directly behind him, the long-legged blonde considered the centerfold for a moment.
I've seen better.
The Hispanic was so startled by this unexpected voice he tried to jump in several equally decisive directions at once, but found himself unable to move his head or neck. As the initial shock wore off, a few seconds later, he found that someone held him by the chin and the back of his head with such power he could not move. He also found the more he squirmed, the tighter the grip became, and the grip was already so tight it was bringing tears to his eyes. The woman who held him now tilted the man's head backward slowly, so he was looking straight up. Keeping her incredible grip on him, she looked down into his moist brown eyes.
Did you really think the girl in that centerfold had a great body?
Frozen in a vice-like grip, he looked up at the striking blonde with eyes that seemed to get wider by the second.
No comment, huh? Well, if you really want to see a great body, you should take a look at mine.
With a sudden twist, she rotated the man's head 180 degrees. From his neck came a crunching snap, and his body went limp in the chair. The lookout's dead eyes now gazed upon her perfect body.
Well, what do you think? No comment, huh? You guys are all the same. You can never make up your minds about what you like.
She released her grip, allowing his body to slide slowly down to the deck. She smiled at the dead Hispanic as a thought came to mind.
My body has turned a lot of heads in its time, but I think you've overdone it a bit.
Turning away, she scoured the flying bridge. Checking in cabinets and drawers, she found in the latter an old-fashioned, semi-automatic 45 caliber pistol that the United States military stopped using in the 1990s. Releasing the clip, she examined it. Noting it was fully loaded with 7 rounds, she snapped the clip back into place and operated the weapon's slide that fed a bullet into the chamber. Moving quietly to a teak door built into the center of the bridge's console, the deadly blonde passed through the open door and made her way down 2 flights of stairs. As she progressed, the sound of men yelling became louder. Reaching the lower deck, she drifted down a companionway in the direction of the shouting, which had now diminished to only one voice until she arrived at a louvered door. Peering through the louvers, the young blonde saw a hideous sight. A woman who was tied to a chair was dead. Her head, from the eyebrows up, had been blown off, possibly by a shotgun. Taking in the situation, all the muscles in her incredible body flexed, moving like waves over her body. Shifting her gaze, she was able to discern a man who was also tied up in a chair and facing the dead woman. He was shouting at another, very well-dressed man who sat on the other side of the room. There was also a very large man standing right beyond the door. The long-haired blonde, taking in the situation, steeled herself at the door.
You fucking bastard! You killed her! You killed her!
It's her own damn fault. She ran her head into Toby's shotgun, and it went off by accident. It just goes to show she doesn't have the brain she was born with. And there's the proof.
As he pointed at what remained of the detective's wife's head, the other men in the room began to laugh with their boss, but they suddenly stopped. If someone were to have told the detective an atomic bomb had gone off in the room, he would not have been at all surprised. The louvered door literally flew off its hinges and crashed into a thug standing in front of it. The door itself was not heavy and did little to the big man it hit outside of startling him. Jensen watched with his one open eye in amazement as the door bounced off the big man. What happened next was so awe-inspiring that later the detective found it hard to describe what had occurred. Following the flying door, he saw a red streak. He was not quite sure what the streak was until it stopped behind the man the door had hit. The streak was a woman, and to use an old phrase literally, she was a blonde bombshell. The man she was now behind was just reacting to the impact of the door and did not seem to be aware of her presence until she drove her right hand like a knife into his back. With utter astonishment, Detective Jensen saw the woman's hand penetrate the man's body with no seeming effort. A heartbeat later, she forcefully extracted a foot-long section of the man's backbone. The victim let out a bone-chilling scream that froze everyone in the room. With lightning motion, as her quarry collapsed, she brought the .45 semi-automatic pistol to bear and fired 7 shots so rapidly that the detective swore she had a machine gun. Each of the 7 bullets found its mark in the center of a drug dealer's chest. With all her rounds spent, she hurled the empty weapon at yet another man who had dropped his own gun in the excitement of the moment. The pistol caught him on the top of his head with such force that the impact split his skull open like an overly ripe melon. The thug's body quivered slightly after hitting the floor, then death enveloped him. If someone would have had a stopwatch running at the time, they would have noted that only 2 seconds had elapsed since the door had come off its hinges. The astounding speed at which this blonde bombshell moved was nothing short of phenomenal. It became apparent to the detective that this once formidable group of drug dealers who had occupied the room seconds ago had dwindled to 4. One of the 4 was the kingpin, Major Gomez, who surprisingly enough still sitting quietly with his hands folded in his chair. Toby, the man who had shot his wife, although armed with a shotgun, just stood there with his eyes wide open while his body quaked with cocaine withdrawals and shock. Of the last 2 men, one was charging headlong into the young woman armed with a switchblade. The other, a giant of a man, crashed into her from behind and wrapped enormous arms bulging with muscles around the woman's chest, pinning her arms to her sides. "I've got the beach! Seek her!" The blade-wielding man's motion was fluid as he thrust the 6-inch blade directly under the breastbone into the heart. To his dismay, however, he pulled his blade out of the chest of his fellow thug, who still had his arms around the space the woman used to occupy. He watched in outrage as the man he had just stabbed crumpled to the floor. Blood squirted like water from a fire hose out of the open wound. "Shit! Where'd the fucking beach go?" He did not have long to wait for his answer. Detective Jensen had seen where she had gone, but could not believe the speed, agility, and sheer power she used to get there. The long-haired blonde stood directly behind the knife-wielder, then launched the heel of her left hand against the base of his skull. There was a loud popping sound as the man's head stretched a full 4 inches away from his shoulders. His tongue, having been forced out of his mouth by the blow, was bit in 2 as the spasms of death took him. Without hesitation she turned, hurled herself across the room, and had Toby disarmed before anyone had a chance to blink. The man who had shot the detective's wife had completely lost his nerve and was in near mental collapse. He held out his hands. "Please, please don't hurt me." With speed that would blind a rattlesnake, the killer blonde grabbed his right wrist with her right hand and simultaneously slammed her left forearm into the upper part of that arm. Toby's right arm broke like a dry twig, and a bone erupted through his skin with a torrent of blood. Continuing the motion even before Toby could scream, she drove his right arm forward, guiding the jagged end of the protruding bone into his eye socket and pushed it deep into his brain. He became very stiff and was dead before he hit the floor. The woman pushed back her long blonde hair as she looked down at him with her stunning Caribbean blue eyes.
"I had no intention of hurting you. Kill you, yes. Hurt you? No."
Bending down, she scooped up the dead man's shotgun, chambered a fresh round, and turned towards Major Gomez, who was still seated and doing something quite unusual. He was clapping, not like someone applauding a great performance, but a very slow, mocking clap as this incredible blonde walked over to him.
"I'm impressed. Very impressed.
"And what impresses you?"
I had no idea the physical training requirements of the FBI were so rigorous."
"What makes you think I'm FBI?"
"Well, whether you're FBI or KGB, it doesn't make any fucking difference. This boat is in international waters, and whoever you are, you don't have any jurisdiction here. My attorneys will have me out in less than an hour." "But, just for the record, who the hell are you anyway?"
"Steele. Nina Steele.
Detective Jensen, who could not keep his one open eye off the incredible young woman, came to a sudden realization, and he started to chuckle. Major Gomez looked savagely at the detective.
Shut up, fool. I'll deal with you later.
I don't think so.
Why not, pendejo?
Because I'm willing to bet that she's not FBI or KGB. She's a TK.
TK stands for terrorist killer. No one is sure who was the first to coin the term terrorist killer, but it probably was a terrorist. The need for terrorist killers, or terrorist bounty hunters as they are officially known, can be traced back to three main events. The first was the end of the United States-Iraqi War. Because of this war, it became evident to Third World non-allied countries that it was impossible to stand toe-to-toe with a superpower and win. Therefore, well-financed terrorism became the only option to these countries who opposed the superpowers. Second was the invention of a practical room-temperature superconductor by Arthur Steele. This invention made oil about as valuable as sand and threw those nations who depended on oil revenues into a deep depression. Also, the countries who had been enslaved to their oil-rich counterparts now turned their backs on them. Now these poor oil producers turned to terrorism in an attempt to maintain the power they had become accustomed to. Finally, the discovery of the gene that produces the bases of cocaine in the coca plant could be transplanted into common bacteria. This bacterium could be grown in large volumes almost anywhere. This destroyed the highly profitable cultivation of the coca plant. This sent many South American countries into bankruptcy, also forcing them to use terrorism to maintain their former power. With this cocaine-producing bacteria, cocaine became as available as aspirin at roughly the same cost. This was the final death blow to America's less than half-hearted war on drugs. It was the United Nations Security Council that approved placing bounties on terrorists and the existence of terrorist bounty hunters. Hoping to solve two problems simultaneously, the United States recommended drug dealers be included under the definition of terrorists. This recommendation was wholeheartedly approved. After the passage of the resolution, many groups of bounty hunters arose overnight. Some were good, but the majority were not. The system of terrorist bounty hunting, like most new systems in nature, worked itself out. In this case, there were two types: the few well-financed and organized terrorist hunters that did very well and prospered, the others who were poorly organized and either ran out of money or were killed off by their quarry. An interesting twist to this was that the really good terrorist killers were women. Psychologists tried for years to explain this phenomenon, but no reason was ever found. Major Gomez looked sharply at this amazing woman, who up to this point had an expressionless face, but now she sported a big smile. Blood drained out of Major Gomez's tobacco-brown face, turning it stone white with the knowledge that she was a terrorist bounty hunter. And terrorist bounty hunters did what their name implied. They hunted terrorists for a profit, with very few rules to govern them.
I don't mean to bring this party to an end, but the United Nations wants you dead or alive, and they're willing to pay $250,000.
I'll pay you 10 times that much if you let me go. I'll make any deal you want. What do you say?
I don't think so. I never make deals with terrorists.
Major Gomez's mind raced as he stared into the business end of a 12-gauge shotgun. He swallowed hard, and then held both hands out.
Okay, you win. Take me in and book me or whatever you TKs do.
Standard operating procedure for anyone who is wanted dead or alive is to bring them in dead. It's easier, and it saves the overburdened taxpayers a hell of a lot of money on a trial.
You wouldn't shoot an unarmed man, would you?
Nina Steele answered his question by promptly pulling the trigger. A hail of buckshot slammed into Major Gomez's chest, blowing a softball-size hole in it, and showered the wall behind him with blood and organ material. Then, without a second thought, Nina Steele slung the shotgun over one shoulder and went to the detective's side.
How'd you know I was here?
I didn't. I've been tracking Major Gomez's cocaine manufacturing and dealing operation on my own ever since the United Nations Anti-Terrorist Division put a bounty on his head 2 months ago. Who are you, anyway?
I'm Detective Mike Jensen of the Key West Police, and I
The lightning-fast routing of Major Gomez and his gang of thugs had temporarily taken his mind off the death of his wife, but now it was over and his face contorted in sadness. He tried to fight back the tears. They came, nevertheless.
Carol, they killed her.
Nina went behind the detective swiftly. What she did there would have dumbfounded anyone. Grabbing hold of the handcuffs with her fingers, she effortlessly snapped the handcuffs' hardened steel band as if it was made of soft plastic. Similarly, the heavy rope binding the detective's chest broke like pieces of thread under her grip. Once free, Mike Jensen leaped out of his chair and embraced his wife's limp form. Seeing this, Nina hurried over and freed the cuffs binding Carol's body as well. For 15 minutes, Nina Steele stood quietly as the detective hugged his wife and wept.
What kind of world do we live in, where such mindless brutality occurs almost on a daily basis over a drug with no purpose other than profit and human suffering?
In time, Mike Jensen stood up, and with Nina's help, they eased Carol's body to the floor and covered it with a sheet from a nearby bunk. With this done, Nina and Mike went topside, where the detective took in several deep breaths of ocean air and then sat on a deck chair. He looked deliberately at his savior.
I've read about you in the papers. You're Arthur Steele's daughter, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
I can't figure it out. Why would you, the daughter of the richest man on earth, and from what I've heard a genius, want to risk her life as a TK?
If I don't, who will?
You're right, of course. There's so many people, especially the rich, who are constantly complaining about crime and injustice in the world, but there are damn few who are willing to help.
How's your eye? Or your whole face, for that matter? Do you need something for it?
I don't know. Maybe some ice.
Nina Steele sprang to her feet, made her way to the yacht's galley, and located a towel and ice. When she returned, the detective was leaning over the side, retching. She waited in silence until he returned to his chair a minute later. He expressed his thanks as he applied the compress to his eye. Nina took the seat next to him and removed a small black box about the size of a hand calculator from a thin belt around her waist. The device had an assortment of dials and buttons on it. Looking over at her boat, she pressed a series of buttons and turned a dial. The boat suddenly came to life and started for the yacht.
What's that?
A remote control for my boat. I'm bringing it over here.
Oh?
Mike looked on inquisitively as Nina Steele expertly maneuvered her boat by remote control.
Before I came aboard, I contacted the Coast Guard Air-Sea Rescue. They should be here shortly.
You think of everything, don't you?
Nina smiled at that. Rising from her chair, she walked to the yacht's railings to guide the boat in the final few yards. As her speedboat nudged alongside, she vaulted over the railing and dropped onto its deck. Startled by this, the detective jumped from his chair and raced haphazardly to the railing.
What are you doing?
I'm leaving. Air-Sea Rescue will be here in no time. They'll take care of you.
But what about all these dead assholes in this tub? Don't you want to claim their bounties?
If you read about me in the paper, you know I always give the bounties I collect away to a good cause or to someone who really needs it. And I have decided that you, Detective Mike Jensen, should receive these bounties.
With that, Nina hit the throttles and the powerful, superconductive electric motors hurled the boat forward. If the detective said anything else, it was lost in the sound of water crashing against the speedboat's hull. Engaging the on-board navigation computer, Nina Steele programmed a course to the nearest port, Key West. With that accomplished, she noted a light flashing on the communication panel that indicated she had an incoming message. Placing the boat on automatic pilot, Nina went into the speedboat's cabin. The cabin contained a small kitchenette with a built-in table, a head, 2 built-in bunks, and a video screen and control panel over them. Dropping onto one of the bunks, Nina thumbed a button on the video control panel, bringing the screen to life. The first image on the screen was a picture of the Earth with the letters ASF, straddling it at 10, 2, and 6 o'clock positions. Across the bottom, there were small letters, which read, Arthur Steele Foundation. This faded to a menu featuring several different options, of which the 6th, videogram, was flashing. Nina seemed startled.
I don't think I've ever received a videogram before.
After a moment, a pleasant computerized electronic voice spoke from the video control panel asking if she wished to view the videogram at this time. The equipment being voice-activated, Nina Steele responded in the affirmative. The menu quickly faded away to a video image of a sandy-haired man in his 50s seated behind a large desk. Nina's eyes opened wide in surprise.
Dad!
Her smooth, tan legs were propped up on the wooden desktop as the middle-aged man walked into the office. A red, 4-inch stiletto pump dangled off one of her feet that rested next to the desktop computer. She was wearing a tight-fitting green knit dress so short that if she had been wearing panties, it would have been effortless to see what color they were. Equally as revealing was the diving neckline that all but exposed a very generous set of lightly tanned breasts. Teetering back in her chair, this young woman's shoulder-length auburn hair glistened in the morning sun that shone through a small office window. This was one remarkably beautiful woman. As the man who had just entered closed the door behind him, the young beauty turned her head and trained her Caribbean blue eyes on him. A smile came across her exquisite face, exposing a flawless set of pearly white teeth. On top of the desk was a large white bowl of cut fruit and vegetables. She picked a sizable carrot from this and pointed it at the newcomer.
Morning, Paul. Like a carrot?
No, thanks, Pam. I haven't even had my morning coffee yet.
That's Dr. Randall's to you.
No, aren't we formal today? Pam sharpened her gaze at him and took a bite from the carrot. What put you in such a wonderful mood today? Pam raised her eyebrows.
Didn't you hear?
Hear what? Pam pointed to a comfortable chair in front of her desk with the remainder of her carrot.
Well, then you better sit down for this, Paul.
Paul seated himself cautiously. Hear what?
The results from the Brainchild Computer Evaluation Study.
That report was not supposed to be out until next week.
Well, the report is done, and it just so happens I went on a date last night with one of the guys who helped write it.
Did you fuck his brains out?
As a matter of fact, I did. But that's not the point.
Okay, then what is the point?
The report says that the newly installed Brainchild computer in our nuclear fusion department has surpassed everyone's expectations, and therefore
the review committee is recommending massive layoffs of technicians and scientists, right?
Right.
Paul fell back in his chair and ran his fingers through his short brown hair. Shit, I just bought a new house, and now I'm going to get the boot.
And your wife is pregnant, too, or had you forgotten?
No, Pam, I haven't forgotten, but maybe now you can put that super brain of yours to some use other than making wisecracks. Tell me something.
Anything for you.
Tell me where the hell I'm going to find a job. Those damn Brainchild computers are everywhere. So who needs a scientist like me if you can buy a computer that doesn't eat or sleep but can think creatively just like a human and do it 100,000,000 times faster?
Unemployment is bad everywhere. I read yesterday it topped 22% nationwide, but then again, look at the bright side.
What bright side?
You've been employed on the Berkeley campus for what, 17 years?
18.
Well then, you should get about 2 years' salary and severance pay. Also, you'll get unemployment for 6 months. And as you're about the cheapest man I have ever met, you must have a healthy savings account.
Paul pursed his lips for a moment as he thought. Maybe you're right. Maybe I could make it for a couple of years without a job, and by that time maybe the economy might turn around, but you're wrong about me being cheap.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. I just took Karen out to dinner and a play last Saturday night.
Oh, yes, I know. She called me Sunday morning and told me all about it. Karen said she was so shocked you were going to spring for dinner and a show that she thought she was going to have a miscarriage. She can't even remember the last time you took her out. And you two have been married for what, 10 years?
Okay, you're right. I'm cheap. No need to rub it in, you know. I guess the only person that won't get the boot is the great Dr. Pamela Randall's director of this fine department.
That's where you're wrong. The report also recommended that this fine department should be put under the control of the Berkeley Atomic Energy Division, and that will put me in the unemployment line, too.
Paul all but jumped out of his seat. You're kidding! Fire you? A 2-time Nobel laureate in physics? You've the finest mind I've ever seen. There isn't one person on campus that doesn't say the same. Pam kicked her feet off the desk and spun her chair around to face her friend.
So what? Now they have a computer that is smarter than me and can think millions of times faster to boot. What the hell do they need me for, huh? Anyway, I'm bored to death of this place. I need to find something to do with my life and something that will challenge all of my abilities.
A job that will challenge all your abilities? Impossible.
Nothing's impossible.
Pam popped a handful of grapes into her mouth. For you it is. Pam cocked her head.
How so?
Have you ever bothered to take stock in your abilities? Pam simply shrugged her shoulders and shook her head. Well, let me enlighten you. You received 4 PhDs in physics at what, 16? Since then, you've won 2 Nobel Prizes. You've taken fusion power in 3 years from a dream to reality. You have black belts in 7 different martial arts. You skydive, scuba dive, ski, and shoot skeet blindfolded and never miss. Not to mention, you're the most beautiful woman I have ever seen and only 22 years old to boot. And now you want a job that will challenge you? Good luck, man!
I can dream, can't I?
As she spoke, Pam noticed for the first time a square piece of yellow plastic in Paul's hand and pointed out the object.
What's that?
Oh, the security guard was bringing this down to you, and I told him I'd save him a trip. It's one of those, new videograms. Paul handed it over to Pam.
Why would anyone send me a videogram when they could just call me on the phone?
Got me. Plug it in, find out. Pam pushed the videogram into a slot on the computer console built into her desk and pressed a few buttons. Seconds later, one of the 3 pictures attached to the wall at Pam's left, which depicted an autumn scene, faded away and was replaced by the videogram image of a man sitting behind a desk.
That's my dad.
Her father was bald, very thin, and in his 60s. He spoke softly in a matter-of-fact tone.
Pamela, I have to apologize for sending you this videogram, but I can assure you there is a very important reason for it. I also want to assure you that everything is okay. However, there is something very important I need you to do. I told you 8 years ago, on your 16th birthday, you were adopted. This is, of course, true, but I didn't tell you the whole truth, for I was bound by an oath that I wouldn't. There is a fantastic secret that surrounds you and how you came to be. A secret that I helped cover up 20 years ago, and the time has come for you to find out the truth. You must travel to the Steel Tower in Chicago and be there at 9 o'clock tomorrow night. You will be met by one of my FBI agents in front of the building memorial. His name is David Goldberg. He will take you to meet a very old and dear friend of mine who has all of my trust. She will tell you the truth. I never could.
The screen went blank, and the image of the autumn scene returned.
Well, tie me up and fuck me till I'm blind.
What the hell was that all about?
I don't have a clue. But my father has never lied to me, and I would do anything he asked.
But still, why would the deputy director of the FBI send his daughter a videogram? Pam shrugged her shoulders again. Maybe you should give him a call and find out what's going on. Pam thought about this for a moment.
No, I know my father better than anyone. He's totally methodical and does everything for a reason.
Well, in that case, when are you leaving?
I guess I'll catch a flight out tomorrow morning.
Pam gazed off into space, consumed with what seemed to be an uncomfortable thought. Then, why don't you come over to the house for dinner tonight? I'll have Karen make up your favorite stir-fry, and then we can talk about this mystery.
Oh, that sounds good to me.
Paul asked, noting Pam's somewhat disturbed state of mind. What's wrong, Pam?
Remember that nightmare I told you about that I have now and then?
The one about you as a child fleeing from something terrible through the snow?
It again last night. It was more real than it has ever been in the past, and now I have the strongest feeling that tomorrow I'm going to meet that dream face to face.
In that case, why don't you stay with us tonight in the guest room? And then tomorrow I'll drive you to the airport myself.
Thanks. I'd like that.
Shaking herself from her morbid thoughts, a large, almost devious smile washed away the concern on her face.
But before we do anything else, let's get some revenge.
What in the world are you talking about? What revenge?
Here.
Pam scooped out 2 darts from her desk drawer and passed one over to her friend. Paul looked at the dart curiously. "What's this for?" Pam pointed at a black and white picture of what had to be the homeliest-looking black man she had ever seen pinned to the back of the door. The picture already had many dart holes in it. "My God, who's that? He looks like an ape."
That, my dear friend, is our nemesis, Dr. John Weber, the creator of the brainchild computer.
Paul looked back down at his dart and smiled. "Good idea." Throwing his dart, Paul hit the photographed man in the forehead.
Hey, good shot!
Pam threw her own dart, striking the computer's creator in the left eye.
Bullseye.
More like chimp's eye. 2 men sat at a corner table at one of Cambridge's most exclusive restaurants. One was white, the other black. To the waiter who served them, these 2 men could not have been greater opposites, even if they had tried. The waiter had commented often to his co-workers about this very fact. They came in every night at roughly the same time for dinner. With their arrival, there would be the customary argument over what table they would sit at, what wine they would order, and whether or not the English girls were better looking than Americans. It was bewildering to the waiter why 2 men, who never seemed to agree on anything, would want to have dinner every night together. And tonight was no different from any other. The waiter, with obvious disgust, placed the very rare hamburger in front of the black gentleman who was speaking to his dinner partner. "I can't imagine why you'd spend all that money on that English hat you just bought. Looks like half a bowling ball." The waiter looked across the table at the impeccably dressed English gentleman. He was a tall, waspish man with blond hair, a high forehead, and the kind of face that left women tripping over themselves to get a second or third look. The Englishman eyed the black man sharply as the waiter heard him respond.
The reason you cannot imagine is you do not have anything to imagine with.
"Well, if you English are so smart, then why am I installing one of my brainchild computers at Cambridge University, your alumna?" The English gentleman, the waiter noted, seemed to have trouble with a comeback to this allegation, so the waiter chose that moment to interrupt his guest and address the black American. "Dr. Weber, is there anything else you might want with your hamburger?" "Why must you English be so goddamn formal? I've been coming here every night for over a month, so you should know me pretty well by now. So please call me John." In England, it's not proper for a waiter to refer to a guest by their Christian name, especially if you are eating dinner with an English lord, Sir Richards. "English lord, my ass. His lowlife's name's Mark, and he's a political advisor to your king or queen or whatever the hell you got nowadays, and that makes him about the lowest scum on earth." The waiter suddenly felt very uncomfortable being in the middle, as he was, of this latest argument. "If you gentlemen will not require my services, I will leave you to your dinner."
Very well.
As the waiter scurried away, Sir Marcus Richards examined his dinner partner shrewdly. From his low-sloping forehead to his big jaw to the almost limitless amount of short, fuzzy black hair he had on virtually every part of his body. These features made him look every bit a chimpanzee or some cruel accident of nature. But this was the furthest from the truth, for the man who sat across from him was the greatest living computer design engineer and, strangely enough, his best friend. He had only met John Weber a month ago, after the King of England had assigned him to oversee the Brainchild project. But from the moment he laid eyes on him, he experienced a tremendous feeling of belonging, almost as if John Weber had been some long-lost friend or brother. Yet he had never met this curious-looking black man before. His heart told him they were somehow connected. Mark also speculated that his dinner partner had experienced the same feelings he had at almost the same instant. John took notice of Mark's close scrutiny. "Admiring my good looks?"
Hardly. I was just pondering something.
"What, your own stupidity?"
No. I was pondering how I could have the extreme misfortune to work with a quadriplegic ape like yourself for a month, and then for both of us to receive a rather ambiguous but identical videogram from our fathers, asking each of us to travel to the Steel Tower in Chicago to meet the same person at the same time.
John's smile melted off his face, and for the first time in the month Mark had known him, John had a serious, almost frightened look on his face. "Do you remember your early childhood?" Normally, Mark would have taken advantage of this sudden openness and come back with some sarcastic remark. But Mark had an overwhelming desire to answer the question.
I have a very clear memory of my childhood, as far back as the first time I met my adopted father. I was about 2 years old then. I'm told it is amazing to have such good recall from one's early years, but I remember nothing before that.
My memory is also very clear of my childhood. Like you, I have no recollection of anything before my adoption at age 3. However, I am plagued by a recurrent nightmare of running across a snowy field as a young child in a desperate attempt to escape some tremendous evil, and then...
And there is some great person protecting me until I almost reach safety. But then something happens, and they are gone.
That's it! That's my dream! They both caught their breath for a moment, and when the moment passed, Mark reached over the table with an open hand. John took it in a handshake. I have no idea what is going to happen when we walk into the Chicago Steel Tower together, but let's be sure we do it as the best of friends. Lightning crackled across the sky, spreading out like the limbs of a giant oak tree. Seconds later, the concussion of thunder shook the Boeing 787 airliner that bore into the murky clouds. Among the airliner's 480 unremarkable passengers, there was one very remarkable one. Third row back in first class sat a woman. Her long auburn hair fell loosely around her shoulders. She wore a cream-colored blazer and a matching modest-length skirt. When she had boarded the aircraft at Moscow's International Airport, men fell over themselves trying to catch a glimpse of her truly stunning features. And even now, after this 10-hour non-stop flight, men were still strolling by, supposedly on the way to the restroom, stared in awe at the now sleeping auburn-haired beauty. This constant flow of admirers was quite disconcerting to the two men who occupied the seat next to her. They had boarded the aircraft with her and had prevented anyone from getting within arm's length. These two men spoke in whispers, using their first language, Russian. During a break in their conversation, the older of the two sat next to the young woman, shifted his barrel-chested torso in his seat to look at her. As he did, he noted her body was twitching, and the eyes under her closed eyelids were moving rapidly. He looked back to his younger comrade. She is dreaming again.
I hope it is not the same dream as before, Comrade Colonel. You remember what happened when you tried to wake her from a dream last year?
The gray-haired colonel nodded and looked back at the woman. Her body was almost trembling now. This is a bad one. He reached over to her hand, which in the spasm of the dream had moved from her lap to her armrest. But just before grabbing it in an attempt to wake her, he hesitated.
Comrade Colonel, remember what happened last time? You told me you had to wear a cast on your arm for 3 months.
The colonel withdrew his hand. As he did, a faintest hiss of a voice coming from the woman's lips.
Don't leave now. We need you.
With these words, as in the past, the colonel saw her body become rigid, her hands clamped down on the metal ends of the armrests. Long fingers driven by muscle power that belonged to Hercules, the hero of Roman mythology, she crushed the steel end caps like wet cardboard. At that very same instant, the woman's eyes flew open and she gasped for air. She seemed to be dazed and somewhat confused about where she was until she could hear a familiar voice. Romana, are you all right? Romana turned her head and saw two concerned faces looking at her from the seats to her right.
Yes, thank you.
Romana sat up in her seat, straightened her hair, and tried to act as if nothing was wrong. It was the same dream again, was it not? Romana nodded while staring out of the aircraft's window into the gloomy darkness. Then, turning to face the two men, and forced a smile.
Yes, it was the same dream, more horrible this time than ever. I see the same woman lying in the snow, blood everywhere. She was trying to save me, but I have no idea from what. You know, if you two are supposed to be my KGB bodyguards, why do you not protect me from my dreams?
Your father has trained me well as a KGB agent, and I can protect you from any physical harm, but...
But it is up to me to protect myself from the evil that lurks within my own mind. Huh?
Something like that.
It's funny. I spend my days helping other people cope with their own troubled minds, but I can't even understand my own.
That has been true of all the great psychologists throughout the history. And you are the greatest of them all.
You may be right, Boris, but that does not make it any easier on me.
I do not believe life was meant to be easy.
Romana looked quizzically at the two gentlemen and tried a little quip to lighten up the situation.
Boris, Rostilov, what's gotten into you tonight? You have both turned into real philosophers. Now, why don't you tell me why I am making this ridiculous trip to the United States to meet someone I have never heard of? And why my father sent me a videogram instead of asking me in person?
As Romana spoke, she took one of the colonel's hands in hers. The smile that had been on the two KGB agents quickly ebbed away. They looked at one another briefly. Then Boris looked deeply into Romana's blue eyes. I do not know any more than you do, Romana.
You're my oldest and dearest friend. You have been with me since I was a child, and we have always been honest with each other. And now you hold the truth from me. Why?
Boris's eyes turned suddenly sad. I have dedicated the past 20 years of my life seeing that no harm befell you, and I love you like the daughter I might have had. I would never lie to you, even if I was ordered to do so. The simple truth is, I am to escort you to the Arthur Steele Foundation offices in Chicago at the Steel Tower, with a limousine provided by the Russian embassy. Once there, I am to wait outside until you return.
Why are you not allowed to come in with me? You go with me everywhere, sometimes even in the ladies' room to ensure my safety.
I do not know, but I wish I could. Romana released Boris's hands and cupped his face with hers.
You do realize you cannot refuse me if I choose to draw the information from you?
A weak smile came to Boris's face as he brought his own hands up and placed them over hers. When you first learned that you could control a person's mind and discover their innermost secrets, I was the one of the first you tried it on. While under your control, you learned nothing new about me, for I have always told you the truth. Still, if you feel I have misled you, please feel free. Enter my mind now. Romana jerked her hands away from his face, threw herself back into her seat, and slammed her fist down on the armrest in a childlike fit. There was a terrible crunching noise. Romana lifted her arms slowly and looked down at the armrests. The steel-reinforced armrests had been crushed down to the level of the seats. Boris looked at the flattened armrests. I wonder if the Americans will charge us for that. Romana shook her head violently and opened her mouth. Before she could speak, Boris placed his hand over her mouth. I know what you're going to say. We have talked about it so many times in the past. Why are you so different? Why are you so incredibly strong? Why are you so intelligent? Why? I do not know why. But I have a feeling that you will have all your questions answered tonight. They looked into each other's eyes, as a father and daughter might after getting through a difficult event. Over the aircraft's intercom, a tone sounded, followed by a dry but efficient female voice that said, "The captain has turned down the fasten your seatbelt sign. We will be landing at O'Hare International Airport in 20 minutes.